Okay, we're going to talk about glazing our teapots. This teapot's a little bit bigger than your practice teapots, but your theme teapots may be this big. The first thing you need to do is make sure that your hands are clean and that the surface is clean. So if you feel like you have some crumbs left on there, you need to get those crumbs out from the inside and take a very pretty dry sponge. You can have a little bit of water in it and just clean off the surface of the pot. Make sure that there's no sharp edges and that things are pretty cleaned up. Next thing you need to do is pick your glaze based on the chart and make sure you stir it well. So I'm going to scrape it along the bottom. Remember to pull that glaze up from the bottom to the top, up from the bottom to the top. So really stir it well. Make sure it changes consistency, goes from thin to melted ice cream, heavy cream. Now we have some pitchers that you can use, and then there's also funnels if you can't pour it to the inside, or if your opening is really small, you can stick a funnel in there and pour it in. So what I'm going to do now is scoop it in here and then pour it to the inside. Now sometimes you get drips on the outside, so that's why you want to glaze the inside first. So now what I can do is I can take and put my thumb over this and make sure that there's glaze to the inside. And then I can slowly pour it out, getting the whole inside. Be prepared, it's a little messy. But now I can take the outside and glaze it. What you really have to be careful with is to make sure that those holes on the inside don't fill with glaze. So this is a pretty small area, but it looks okay. If the glaze is really thick, if you pour too many coats on, if you pour 3 coats in the middle, those holes that are on the inside, your sieve can fill up with glaze. Sometimes I'll wrap my hand around the portion and just blow into it where the glaze is still wet. Now the whole inside is glazed, so now I have to glaze the outside. And so, again, stir it, and you can dip it this way. Depending on how much glaze is in the bucket, you can maybe get the whole piece glazed. But now I have a little bit here that needs glazing. So I have a decision to make. I can decide to turn it over and just dip that top part in a different glaze, or I can dip it in the same glaze and do something different. So for your practice teapots, I still want you practicing. So I'm going to show you a couple options. I'm just going to turn this over, dip this last little bit in. And some people will say, can you see the overlap? And in many cases, you can see the overlap. So you want to make sure that you're overlapping where it makes sense. Okay. I'm going to show you a couple options for doing some splash glazing. We have this squirter aspirator, and you're going to squeeze it and fill it. This is just one option. So I'm going to fill it with glaze so that they're glazed to the inside. Get a little more in there. So now it's full of glaze. And you can hold your pot sideways. And in this case, oftentimes less is more. But I'm just going to start wide and do a couple stripes on there. Okay, if I feel like I want one more or the other side, but sometimes what's really fun is what happens on the edges. It's unplanned, it's hard to control, but it's pretty exciting. Okay, something else you can do, and I wouldn't do this all in one pot, I just want to show you, is dip your brush into a contrasting color, hold your project right over, and just give it a big splash. So that can be exciting as well. So make sure that the end, that you clean off the bottom. You can use the rug to do it, but make sure that all this edge is cleaned off, and be patient. So wait for that glaze to dry, especially if you put a second coat of one on. Just know that a second coat, in many cases, is going to take a little longer to dry. So you want to set it down where it's not going to be bothered and let it sit for 5 minutes and then come back. Because already I have some marks on here. You can see here where I have accidentally touched it when it's wet. And here I've accidentally touched it where it's wet. And so you can touch those up, but they'll never be quite as nice as they should be. So I would probably put a few more stripes on here. Maybe I'd put a couple stripes of a different color and maybe dip this top part in a different color. So kind of experiment with the glazes. You also can take a brush and a dish and paint glaze on. So I really like these brushes that come to a point, and you can just make sure you stir your glaze, fill your dish, and then you can go back and sit at your seat. And what happens when you glaze is you're going to dab the glaze on. So you don't want to brush it, you want to dab it on. I'll show you on. So if I wanted a part of my pot to be a whole different color, instead of brushing, I would dab it on, and you need 3 coats. So that's just 1 coat. So now I would go and dab another color on. And remember to glaze the inside first, then the outside, so you can clean it off, any drips on there. And then I would need 1 more coat on there. So if you want to make some of the areas different colors, make sure you consult the chart to see what colors are going to show up with what colors. You need a dry foot, and then you also need, you're going to glaze your lid as well, but you need to wipe off the bottom part of the lid and set it back there next to each other. Okay, any questions? Let me know.